evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and welcome to our opening of our conference, Exploring Cultural Activism in Israel, Palestine. I'm Diane Moore, and I am on the faculty here. I'm a lecturer in religion, conflict, and peace. I am the director of the Religious Literacy Project, and I have the incredible honor of being the principal investigator of the Religion, Conflict, and Peace Initiative, which is the sponsor of this conference. I am going to open with just some remarks about the Religion, Conflict, and Peace Initiative itself, and then I'll move into my role on the panel to share information about the foundations of the Religion, Conflict, and Peace Initiative. I was remembering as we were putting together the program, I realized that we are kind of the warm-up act for Noam Schuster's comedy routine. And I thought that we will set Noam up well for her brilliance, in spite of our attempts to be our lovely, funny selves. Anyway, so let me just say a few words about the Religion, Conflict, and Peace Initiative, and then I will introduce my wonderful colleagues, and then again say a few words about my contribution to this initiative, and then we'll move into comments by my colleagues here, and then we'll open up for comments and questions from you. So the Religion, Conflict, and Peace Initiative is generously funded by Ramez and Tiziana Susu. It's a 4-year initiative that is jointly sponsored by the Harvard Kennedy School of Government and the Harvard Divinity School. And the intention of the initiative is to collaborate with the Kennedy School of Government and the Divinity School to help us think in fresh and rich and generative ways about some of the most intractable challenges we face in the world today. And our choice for this particular initiative is to focus on Israel and Palestine. So the components of the 4-year, we are in the 3rd year now of this 4-year initiative, and the components of the initiative are coursework, an open fall course that I'm currently teaching, an intensive January term immersion experience where we are able to bring graduate students from across Harvard. This will be our 2nd year, 16 graduate students from 7 different schools across Harvard to have an immersion experience in the region. And the focus of that experience, the name of that course is called Narratives of Displacement and Belonging. And our focus in that 2-week experience is to speak with a variety of activists, cultural activists, government activists, people engaged in civil society from a variety of perspectives and a variety of sectors, to hear their understanding and their what we call deep story of the nature of how they understand not just the challenges that they're facing, but their lives in the world today. And that's an intensive 2-week experience that then we continue into the spring term as we process that experience, and the students then engage in a focused project that will help them translate the purpose and the meaning of their own experience to an audience that's relevant to their vocation or their profession. So it's a long process, and the privilege of working with these students in that context is profound. This will be our 2nd year of taking students to the region. And I see many of our first cohort from last year here in the room, as well as our students who are going to be joining us for this January. So I'm really glad you're here. A 3rd component of the initiative is an opportunity for students who go on this immersion experience in January to apply for and participate in an intensive summer internship where they can return back to the region to work with individuals or particular community groups or cultural activists, artists, writers, educators. It depends on their interests and the interests and the needs of people in the region, but they craft a proposal for summer internship together and then are able to return to the region. And we were able to have 6 students in the region from last year who had a profound and transformative experience through that opportunity. So another component of the initiative is the opportunity for us to bring from the region practitioner fellows here to be with us here at Harvard, to give them support in their work, to give them a sabbatical of sorts, to give them a chance to have a break from their lives and engage intensively in their work, as well as for us to learn from them and about their important work and their experiences, and to help us understand what does it mean to really create new pathways of conversation, new pathways of imagination, as we'll hear from my wonderful friend and colleague Atalia Omer. What's it mean to really rethink the options we have in relationship to particular challenges in conflict and peace through this lens of cultural activism? And so our practitioners are the focus for this wonderful conference that we're going to be having, beginning with Noam Schuster tonight and all day tomorrow. So the focus of this opportunity is to hear from our practitioners, our fellows, about their work in progress. And we will also have another component of the Religion, Conflict, and Peace Initiative is a symposium that we'll be holding also in the spring that will involve, again, our fellows, but other people who are doing creative, imaginative, critical work in the region to help us, again, think in new ways. So we'll also be offering a symposium in the spring. And then there are other just public events. We've got several that we've sponsored already. This is one of them. But if you're interested, please sign up for our newsletter, and we will be able to share with you the information about that. So I'm going to shift now and talk a little bit about moving into the commentary on the panel. I want to talk about the general assumptions that inform what we're trying to do through this incredible experience of this initiative. Before I do that, though, I have to say and introduce someone who is probably the most important person in the room, Reimagining Jewishness, who set up everything to make this happen, and who, right here in the front. Reem is not only a brilliant organizer, she is the program coordinator for the Religion, Conflict, and Peace Initiative, and she does all the remarkable, challenging issues regarding logistics. But she's an incredible partner in our thinking about these issues, very much so, helping us conceptualize what it means to be engaged in this work. Reem's own experience is as an artist, an actress, a writer, and is also Syrian American. And so her own experiences of the challenges that her family has faced and the current challenges in Syria are very prominent and very relevant to our work. So just Reem, on behalf of all of us, thank you from the bottom of our hearts for everything you've done to help make this happen and all you give to us in our project. So thank you. So I'm not going to, there are actually quite deep methodological assumptions and philosophical assumptions that shape the nature of our work together. And I'm not going to, you'll, I hope, be happy to hear, I'm not going to try to cram those all in with a very either long lecture or trying to cram a term's worth of work into a quick commentary. But I will highlight a few dimensions of what it is we're trying to achieve. And you'll see some of this play out then in the nature of the presentations that you'll be hearing, the incredible presentations you'll be hearing throughout our time together. The first assumption is that religions have functioned throughout human history to inspire and to justify human agency from heinous acts of violence to some of the most heroic and inspired acts of kindness, compassion, and justice. So religions are embedded in all dimensions of our experience and very powerful forces, not positive, not negative, but powerful. And part of our work is to help understand what are the religious dimensions that are functioning in this particular project, but my own work is involved with this question in my work across a variety of regions. So the first assumption, again, is that religions are powerful and that they inspire human agency across the full spectrum of our capacities. The second assumption is that religions are still really relevant here in the 21st century, in spite of the assumption that religions would wane in influence by the rise of science and the rise of secular democracies. I think that the notion that that was going to happen, I think, is consistently shattered. But we want to be explicit about that recognition. But the way we understand religion is incredibly problematic and incredibly narrow. And I won't go into the fundamental methodological assumptions that shape what we mean by a more capacious understanding of religion. But there are a set of assumptions that we do promote through our project, through our teaching, to understand the complexity of how religions function. I just want to say that they're more complex than we tend to think about. The third fundamental influence is that understanding these complex roles that religions play is actually a critical dimension of understanding modern human affairs. I would say it's actually critically important to understand human affairs across history. But for our purposes, understanding the complexities of how religions are functioning to help shape ideas of nationalism, which we tend to think of as separate than religion, to help shape understandings of economics, of politics, of societies in general, the roles that religions play and the embedded norms and assumptions that are present in relationship to societies all have powerful religious influences that our work through this project is to help both identify and to name and to be able to call out the places where religion's functioning in ways that are diminishing of human capability and human dignity, and where religions can be garnered to help support the values of human dignity and just peace building. So the final assumption is that this particular initiative examines the complex religious influences and a more capacious and challenging understanding of religion to yield fresh insights into contemporary challenges and opportunities for just peace building with a focus on Israel and Palestine. Now, just peace building is a whole other important methodological foundation of our work. Again, I won't go into a great detail, but I will say that just peace building is not only about the cessation of violence. Just peace building really focuses on structural forms of injustice, structural forms of oppression that continue to diminish the capacity for human dignity and the opportunities for people in societies to fulfill their fundamental capabilities. And the notion that the idea of just peace building is to tackle those structures of injustice as a part of what it means to build a just and peaceful society. Now, the notion of just peace building, again, is more complicated than I have time to go into here, but I will say that there are a couple assumptions we make about that. The first is that structures of oppression exist throughout the globe, and we are facing incredible challenges. We always have, but we're facing incredible challenges, not just in the region, not just here in the US, but across the globe around these questions of violence and of incredible fractions amidst the human experience. And our assumption through this project and my assumption in my work is that this notion of recognizing that what we call structural violence exists in all of these contexts. Structural violence where hierarchies of oppression are able to flourish, where some communities have diminished access to resources and services that allow for human flourishing. Racism, sexism, homophobia, all ways that we have structured forms of oppression are rampant. And that our assumption, though, is that those forms of oppression are neither inevitable and that they also harm everyone, not just the victims of oppression, but also those of us who are participating in what we would end up unconsciously, unwittingly perpetuating forms of oppression, often unwittingly and unconsciously. So our deepest assumption here is that structural violence is central to our challenge. It's certainly present in Israel-Palestine, but not just between Israelis and Palestinians. It's within Israeli society, it's within Palestinian society, and we're going to see some of those nuances play out in our engagement. But please know that one of the fundamental assumption underlying this entire project is that structural violence exists, that we believe that calling it out is not just about the capacity for us then to demonize others, but it's to recognize that those structural forms of violence are harmful for all of us in very different ways, but are harmful to all of us and hinder us from realizing the capacities of peaceful coexistence that I think that all of us, or almost all of us, long to help work toward and achieve. So those are some fundamental assumptions of the project. And our incredible fellows are addressing these questions through what we're calling cultural activism. And that means, in some ways, a reimagining, utilizing cultural activism or culture or the arts in a very broad way to help us understand and challenge and disrupt assumptions that we think we know, and to help us see new possibilities through the imagination and through possibility. All of us are rooted in a profoundly optimistic view of human nature and capacity, in the sense that we believe that our agency matters. I certainly believe that. Many of you have heard me in the room say, I'm from the Midwest. I'm kind of hardwired in this way. It's hard not to be an optimist from the Midwest, but it's not a naive optimism. It's an optimism that says that we can make a difference, and that the challenges we face are not inevitably going to be reproduced, that our agency makes a difference individually in the micro as well as macro levels, and that we are trying through this project to make a small effort to create opportunities for different kinds of conversation across divides, for different kinds of possibilities of what it means to live together in a creative and generative way, and to think about the fact that we do and can make a difference. And I'm going to end with just a very brief story about a time that I had the privilege of doing my graduate education here at the Divinity School. And one of my earliest memories was hearing a feminist liberation theologian named Zola speak in our Braun room, our major room in the Divinity School, which is now under construction, which is why we're here, by the way. And I will never forget this experience. So Zola was, she's gone now. She died prematurely of cancer, but she grew up Christian in Nazi Germany and in a privileged Christian household, and had a really, what she called, an idyllic childhood with loving parents and loving larger community with extended community of family and friends. They were financially, they were economically well off, and so she felt like, the earliest years of her childhood were just kind of almost storybook, she said. Well, she was born in 1929, so in 1945 she was 16. And when the horrors of the Holocaust became public to her, and just unavoidable in the context of Germany, the isolated experience that she and her family was still able to keep from her, she, as a 16-year-old, was horrified. And she went around to all the adults in her family, her teachers, her parents, her aunts and uncles, her friends, and she said, "What did you do to stop this? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't we know? What happened?" And she said in her adult reflection, it was like a litany, what she called a litany of horror. She said she heard this in all these discrete conversations she kept hearing again and again. We didn't know. We weren't aware. We didn't realize. And later she came to understand. She said, well, some of them were just lying because they were just way too influential politically and in the military. And they were lying because they were very much aware and participated in some of the most horrible and heinous direct crimes that were perpetuated in those days. But she said what captured her energy and attention were the people who didn't know on one level, And she realized that they didn't know because they had the privilege to choose not to see. The privilege to choose not to see. And she devoted then her whole life to developing what she called a third eye, the capacity to reflect critically on her own context and critically on our contemporary context, to understand what are the embedded norms and assumptions that participate in creating the possibilities for structural and direct violence to continue to be justified, to continue to be reproduced, in the face of people unwitting reproduction of those because we use our privilege to choose not to see. Because clearly, if the people who did not have that privilege knew exactly what was going on, because they were themselves the victims of the horrors of the time. They were themselves either Jews or perceived to be or accused of being, at the time called homosexual, LGBTQ. They were Roma. They were in some ways designated or deemed to be, quote, disabled. They were Polish. They were trade unionists. So we know there were many, many victims in that horrible time, and her life work was dedicated toward helping to understand not just what happened historically, but what was happening now. She created a really critical theory within feminist theology, Christian theology, where she coined a phrase, Christo-fascism, to understand the power that Christianity had played in promoting and perpetuating anti-Semitism that helped give rise to and create conditions for not just the Holocaust, but other forms of violence. But she also was incredibly imaginative and was a part of a liberation theology movement to say that there are multiple ways to interpret what it means to be Christian and to use, in her context and in many other contexts, a just peace-centered understanding, to use that foundation to utilize her own understanding of her Christian faith to create a different strand of interpretation around what it meant to work on behalf of others across a variety of differences through the lens of her own understanding of faith. So with that sign from Dorte Zola to stop talking, I want to turn this over to talk and just briefly introduce my remarkable colleagues here on this panel and to just say a public thank you to all of them. The one person who is not with us, who is also a religion, conflict, and peace faculty fellow, is Erica Chenoweth, who's a professor at the Kennedy School. She is on sabbatical this semester, but she will be joining us tomorrow. She's unable to come tonight for a previous commitment, but she will happily be joining us tomorrow. And Erica's work has been really incredibly exciting and cutting edge around looking at questions of the power of nonviolence and how do we measure the success of nonviolent movements outside of our normal understandings of success about whether particular goals and opportunities are realized. So Erica is not able to be with us, but we'll be able to at least hear from her tomorrow. But my other colleagues and friends on the panel, Marshall Ganz, on the end here, is the Rita Hauser Senior Lecturer in Leadership, Organizing, and Civil Society at the Kennedy School of Government. And his work in public narrative has been deeply influential in our own project. My own work personally, and his work in the framing and understanding of public narrative, which you'll talk about, has been a really pivotal foundation for us in our work. Atalia Omer, my friend here to the left, is the Associate Professor of Religion, Conflict, and Peace Studies at the University of Notre Dame, and she's a core faculty member of the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies, and her work has really deeply informed mine. Her first book, When Peace Is Not Enough, was just incredibly eye-opening to me, where she's examining the peace movement in Israel. Atalia is Israeli Jew herself and speaks out of that language of what we call situated knowledges, and her work has been profound. And then finally, my also dear friend, Hilary Rantisi, the former executive director of the Middle East Institute and the Kennedy School of Government, and is currently serving as the associate director of the Religion, Conflict, and Peace Initiative. we stole her, okay? We just did. We pulled her right over here. Hilary is actually my first colleague in this. When we realized that we had this opportunity to think about a project that would engage religion, conflict, and peace, that would be unifying the Kennedy School and the Divinity School, Hilary and I were both invited to a conversation at our dean's house, Dean Himpton's house, to think about what kind of things we might do. Hilary being from the Kennedy School of Government, and my dean had tasked me with helping to think about this idea. And I had some ideas, but as soon as I'd known of Hilary's work for years, and we had crossed paths in a variety of different ways across the years, I didn't know she was coming to this meeting, and I had this feeling like when she walked in the door, I said, we can do this. I really did. I thought it was just exactly that, because I thought, I can't do this on my own. Who would we be partnering with? And Hilary and I then ended up having several meetings, and right away I also knew that the other core person in this foundation, with all these other wonderful colleagues that have been now joining us, but the other core person was Atalia Omer for her important work. So the three of us, I just want to say the two of them are honestly the heart of this project. I feel incredibly grateful to be able to be in their company. I am learning more than I ever thought imaginable by my collaboration with them and my other colleagues, and feel just incredibly grateful for the opportunity to engage in this project together. And I'm very happy to welcome you all again to this conference, to our work, to highlight our fellows, and want to thank you and look forward to our conversations tonight and through the day tomorrow. So thank you all very much.
So I hope it's okay if I'm staying seated. Well, first of all, I wanted to just underscore how much I admire Professor Moore for her leadership and persistence with this initiative, and persistence in the focus on Palestine and Israel, despite the kind of the forces of censorship and silencing on this issue. So it takes a lot of courage, and so I've really appreciated your leadership and commitment to this. So I'll just say a few words just to contextualize my own participation and engagement with this Religion, Conflict, and Peace initiative. So I did my both MTS degree and PhD here at Harvard, and I've always been really focused on questions of the relationship between religion and nationalism. And exactly just underscoring the point that Professor Moore made about the need to not look at the national as distinct from certain interpretation of religion, or to identify the ways in which religion participates in the narration of the nation, and what are then the implications for this, for questions of violence, multiple forms of violence, structural, cultural, symbolic, epistemic violence, and also the possibility of peace building and peace with justice, and what will justice look like in every case. So as I said, part of my education happened here within the space of religious studies, specifically looking at religion, social theory, political theory, and cultural theory, and looking at the case of the Israeli peace camp, quote unquote, looking critically. In my work, I developed this concept and methodology, really, that I call critical caretaking. And which means exactly putting that third eye on, and really identifying the ways in which the norms within which we are embedded participate in violence, and with that there is a realization that critique in and of itself is not sufficient as a peace building praxis, but it is necessary that level of critique, but we also need to think of the constructive, the caretaking. What does it mean? And to me, this is where it's very exciting to be a part of this initiative, because this is where this notion and praxis of culture, what we call cultural activism, and we can unpack what it means, comes in. The reimagining, telling a different story. Telling a different story that comes with a critical analysis of how power operates, and how different people and different narratives participate in the what Patricia Hill Collins called the matrix of power, of domination, but also with the recognition that people's experience of oppression is different, and with it also their visions of liberation or emancipation is different. So think of where the kind of content, and not only what I call power reductionist analysis, but also think constructively and creatively. This is where the religious imagination, cultural innovation come into play. So these are some of the questions that I've been looking at. And since graduating from Harvard University, as Professor Moore mentioned, I've been on faculty at this institute, Peace Institute, called the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies at the University of Notre Dame, and where I've been now for 11 years, being challenged by colleagues from different disciplines and practitioners, including students. We have master students who come from all over the world. In fact, we have for every cohort of about 22 students, we have only maybe 2 from the global north. So over the years, I've been very challenged by students from the global south, people who are practitioners, see themselves as practitioners, peace builders, and within that space of the of peace studies, we've always been challenged. So there is the challenge of theory and practice, and what does it mean? And part of my own analysis and my own role, as I see it, is that theory in and of itself is a form of peace-building praxis. This is where the critique comes in, and has been very important for me in my own analysis of my own embeddedness in violence, in those in narratives that are violent. So okay, so as part of my scholarship and my role and being in that space of peace studies, I've been very engaged with this subfield of religion, conflict, and peace building, where I've done a lot of thinking about, and Professor Moore already, again, alluded to it, how do we analyze and understand religion as it relates to violence and peace building. And here it's, in my view, it's very important to not think of religion as an isolated category. In fact, the very ghettoization of religion over and against all these other variables in and of itself is a form of violence that has roots in colonialism. So Professor Moore mentioned this book, When Peace Is Not Enough, which was my first book based on my dissertation work and this analysis of Israeli peace camp, but also, so that would be the level of the critique, but also I looked at, hybrid spaces, marginal spaces, other kind of narratives, other stories, both as already existing and embodied in spaces of counter-hegemony, of critique, as well as spaces that offer resources to populate new modes of imagination of being in the space of identity's relation to the space. And I continue with this work in my most recent book that just came out called Days of Awe, Reimagining Jewishness in Solidarity with Palestinians, where this book involved a lot of ethnographic work with especially American Jewish Palestine solidarity activists and other American Jewish critics of Israeli policies. I mean, there is a whole spectrum, critics of Israeli policies, anti-Zionists. So there is a whole spectrum of actors that I engaged and followed and interviewed and did participant observation, different solidarity trips. And one of the ways in which I felt that my own analysis was deepened in this particular book, this analysis, that this critical caretaking mode of analysis is that through my engagement with this American Jewish Palestine solidarity activist, I recognized the ways in which American Jewishness itself is reimagined through social movement activism, through that process of critique. Because the people I engaged and became a part of recognized that a particular narrative about their Jewish identity, they understood what it meant with respect to Palestinian experiences, but they didn't stop being Jewish. So I trace how they reimagine their Jewishness and what it means. And that process of reimagining is relational because it's very much through engaging with a notion of sinfulness, of collective sinfulness and obligation. But it's also intersectional in that an understanding of the relationship of their kind of moral imagination with respect to the Palestinian struggle also relates to their understanding of their location in the US, questions of anti-racism, xenophobia, and so gender really came to the foreground in ways that it did not come in my analysis, in my first book, in my first engagement. So the analysis became more deeply intersectional and more deeply relational. So I felt very compelled to participate in this initiative because I felt very constrained and critical of the discourse of the dual narrative for exactly failing to do all the things that I just mentioned. So I was very compelled by the framing of the initiative and also especially the J term that Professor Moore mentioned, that it's introducing the students to narratives of displacement and belonging, centralizing questions of violence, not only structural violence. Structural is too limited to understanding the complexities because one of the ways in, that I found the group of people, the whole kind of social movement that I profile in my second book, Days of Awe, is again, just to underscore that intersectional lens, understanding the interconnections, understanding how discourse, how a global discourse informs the questions in the very local of Palestine, Israel. And also identifying a very strong and urgent need to look at narratives as a sites of conflict transformation and peace building. So in order to do peace building vis-a-vis Israel and Palestine, you don't need to go necessarily to Susia, to the West Bank. You need to fight the narrative here, because narratives and frames, as Judith Butler talked about, frames of war very profoundly, are critical for thinking about conflict transformation and peace building. So just to highlight what to me is most compelling and what is so exciting about the fellows that you'll be hearing from, even though they themselves don't necessarily engage in analysis of what I'm going to say right now, but they embody this different stories and this notion of cultural activism. But with respect to the question of narratives of displacement and belonging, I like to trace, and I think it's critical to trace, what does religion has to do with reproducing, demystifying, and resignifying narratives. And so to trace how it plays out on each level is where I see that spaces of cultural activism and the importance of bringing them here to that space, Harvard Divinity School and Harvard Kennedy School, and hopefully, more broadly. So, so in my own thinking, going from the first book to the second book, and in between, engaging with many people who challenge me very profoundly, especially practitioners. And by the way, for a while, I tried to get out of anything that had to do with Israel-Palestine. So I went to Mindanao in the Philippines to study interreligious peacebuilding work, and also to the coastal area of Kenya, Malindi. It's kind of a comparative study. I was very relieved because there were no other Jewish people there, so I didn't feel implicated in the violence directly. But Israel-Palestine kept pulling me back. And I just feel that this is what I need to do and where I need to be in my thinking, in my work, my scholarship. And in my own thinking, what deepened over the years as a result maybe of all this thinking and experiences and scholarship and scholarly work is that I came to understand the degree to which the analysis, the conversation, and thinking about different ways of being in the space need to be decolonized, and we need to have a conversation of what does it mean to decolonize the conversation about that, and intersectional, which are of course interrelated. So with this, this is where I'm coming from to this initiative.
Wow. Well, I will start with just saying what a privilege it is for me to be part of this initiative. And I want to thank especially Professor Diane Moore for her leadership, her courage, her guidance, and mentorship. This is the third year, but I don't know if it feels like the third year. I feel like we've been building up for this for a long time. So I'm very, very happy to be part of this initiative, and very privileged as well. So I have been here at Harvard for 18 years now. I can't believe it, but and my work has been focused on the Middle East and public policy, but my expertise really is on Israel-Palestine. This program, this initiative, provides framing that is applicable globally, as Diane had explained. But our case study here is Israel-Palestine. We hope to do more case studies in the future. Now, my work prior to Harvard was working specifically on social justice issues, and I was based in Palestine, Israel. And having moved here 18 years ago, my frustration with being in the US and in academia that approaches to this Israel-Palestine conflict, there was always an absence of addressing power disparities and justice issues, always lacking, especially coming from where I had been working and the focus that I had. And, I've been here 18 years struggling to kind of try and introduce some of this language. Now, this initiative provides that by providing a series of courses, intellectual and academic engagement for students that includes an analysis of power and powerlessness and has a moral perspective is critical. It's critical for educating the next generation, and it needs to be part of education. There needs to be a moral lens to what we do in academia, and this initiative has a big focus on that, and so I'm very pleased about that. Second, as Atalia said, including the course of learning in context provides real-life examples for students. It takes them to the ground, opportunities for them to learn, to hear from people on the ground, but also to see in their own eyes structural violence. And we talked about sort of seeing and unseeing, and whether you don't always see, but it's there. And then what do you do with what you see? To be able to discern cultural violence and its destroying impact on human beings. Now, our goal isn't just to expose students to manifestations of injustice, but also introducing them to agents of positive change, to peacemakers. And that term, peacemakers, for many in Israel-Palestine has come to take on a very negative connotation. So I have to be careful when I use that. And I think, being also living in the US, looking at this area, there is so much enthusiasm and work and encouragement of what is perceived as peacemaking, as I call it the kumbaya moment, of bringing people together for the sake of bringing people together. And what's lacking in that is, again, the analysis of power and addressing power and powerlessness. And so that does not lead to peace and often is quite violent. And I think what we are trying to do is something different. In this case, we are saying that peacemakers are those who are making invisible violence visible. Think about racism and how it impacts everyone. And so those who are bringing it to our awareness are peacemakers. People who are disrupting injustice without replicating it, without using violence, are peacemakers. Our fellows featured in this conference are involved in this work. They may not see themselves in that way. They're cultural activists. They struggle with many of the things, but they're courageous. That usually comes at a very high cost, but it's so necessary. It's necessary in every case. It's necessary in the US. But in this particular instance, we will hear tomorrow about their work and what they're doing. And I hope you will also have that lens in mind when you hear from them about what they're trying to do in terms of raising our awareness about violence that might not be visible, but also about disrupting violence without replicating it. Often people in that space are very creative, hence cultural activism. And it just happens to be the theme of this conference, but I think it's a thread that comes throughout all our work, and many of the people that we meet on the course, on the ground, many of the people we will continue to work, I think, in the years ahead. We hope that our engagement here on campus and in the community will open new approaches and avenues for moral stances to restore our humanity in all its fullness. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you. It's good. It just took some hands. I don't know if there's significance to the fact that the light in this room seems to be out there, not here. So I don't know. I think we're going to try to bring some balance to that. I'll take a few moments to focus on narrative and our understanding of narrative, and share some concepts that we can explore in more depth in conversation, so forth, but as a way to think about this. I grew up in a tradition, Jewish tradition, in which you grow up in the narrative. In other words, identity is far more linked to story than to place, because it's the story that's portable. And every religious observance is another chapter in the story. So you sort of, let there be light, wow. It just took naming it, and then the light came, and this is we're in the right place here. It's great. No, thanks, Reem. No, and so, so you grow up with this sense of who you are that is already embedded in a narrative that extends across time and has been adapted and survived in many, many different contexts for many, many years. When I became involved in organizing in the civil rights movement, the farm worker movement, I found myself in two movements in which also narrative was fundamental. In the civil rights movement, probably most fundamental of all was the Christian narrative, the narrative of cost and loss and redemption, of resilience, of sources of hope and transformation. And it was expressed in the Black Baptist Church, which was fundamental to the civil rights movement. When I found myself in the farm worker movement, when I got involved in the farm worker movement, it was rooted in Mexican Roman Catholic tradition, which also turned out to be a critical source of solidarity, of courage, of hope, and of aspiration. So it was, it was interesting just to find myself in these places. My father's a rabbi, so I grew up, when I was 13, bar mitzvah, then I had to get away from my own tradition as fast as I could. And ironically, I wind up in the Baptist church and then in the Catholic church. But I had the good fortune, unlike some of my red diaper colleagues. You know what red diaper means? Red diaper babies. Folks raised in families of radical rejection of anything to do with religion. Radical secularism. Yeah, you could call that, yeah. And they were known as red diaper babies. And being raised in a religious tradition enabled me to see some things they did not see in terms of where the moral, emotional, political resources of those movements lay, which was in those traditions. Now, I've been back here for a while and been teaching at the Kennedy School, teaching organizing, and then a few years ago began to develop a particular focus on narrative. And so let me just say a bit about that, because when I was working in the farm workers movement, we were very focused on strategy because we were always David trying to defeat Goliath. And so when you lack institutional resources, you find you have to be more resourceful. And so strategic creativity was a critical dimension of how we could develop the power that we needed. But you could have a great strategy and have it all figured out, and nobody shows up. And if your power depends on your people and they don't show up, well, you don't have much power and it's not a very good strategy. Well, that was the whole second dimension, which was the dimension less of cognition, but more of motivation. And so this dynamic between these two elements of what we think about things and how we feel about things were so interdependent and interrelated in my movement experience. So I did my dissertation on strategy, but found that one of the critical elements of strategy was depth of motivation. And so that's how I came to focus on narrative, because when I came back to school, I discovered Jerome Bruner at the Ed School had done a lot of work on the cultural psychologist, done a lot of work on this question, and points out that we map the world in at least two different ways. We map the world cognitively, which is where things are in relationship to each other, and that's critical for answering the question, how do I get from here to there? But it doesn't help us answer the question, why does it matter? Why do I care? Why should anybody care? That has to do with the second kind of mapping that we do, which is an emotional mapping or an affective mapping of the world. What lifts us up, what disgusts us, what frightens us, what inspires us. And it's that second domain that's the domain of narrative, because narrative is an exercise in the speaking the language of emotion. And this is often a strange concept to talk about in the academy, because the whole idea is to get rid of emotion, right? We're going to be rational creatures, and that's how the world works. And it's a real problem, because if we're going to talk about, well, first of all, if we're going to talk about human beings and how they actually work, and not in the models of how they might work, but also if we're going to talk about values in any way that's meaningful, they're not intellectual abstractions that go in a mission statement somewhere on the wall. They're how we feel. Values are emotional in content because they're related to this emotional mapping of the world. That's how we establish value, that which lifts us up, that which we cherish, that which we fear, that's which that we discuss, that discuss us. So it's important to I think to accept that if we're going to engage in any meaningful conversation about values, we have to learn to speak the language of emotion, not just the language of cognition. And it may seem weird to speak language of emotion. Oh, how, Pascal says, the heart has reason, of which reason does not know. There's this tendency to relegate emotion to, oh, that's crazy, get out of the picture. Well, you remove the emotion from something and you've removed everything from it. St. Augustine wrote, it's one thing to know the good, another to love it. Loving it is what enables action upon it, because knowledge does not equal action without motivation. And motivation, even the word motivation, motor, emotion is the same, that which actually moves us. And if we think language of emotion is a strange concept, just consider music. No words, crazy and irrational, well, some of it might be. But meaning is communicated, intense meaning is communicated through the language of emotion through music, the most plastic of the arts, or theater, or poetry, or worship. We speak the language of emotion a lot. And narrative is fundamentally a way to speak the language of emotion. But to speak the language of emotion with respect to one critical thing, which is agency. And what I mean is this, that if you think about what makes a narrative, the core element in narrative is the narrative moment. It is the moment in which we are confronted with a challenge, in which we must respond, and an outcome results. And sort of that the core element then of plot is that. I mean, like if I said I left my office at the Kennedy School, drove over here, began to talk, is that a plot? I mean, you want to pay to find out what happened next, right? It's really exciting. What makes it interesting? Make it a plot for me. Yeah, well, so so I went out, to get in my car, and the car wasn't there. Instead, there was or maybe a flat tire, but maybe it wasn't there at all. Maybe there's a grease spot where it was. And I'm looking for my car. Where was it? And I go outside, couldn't find my car. And then I hear this noise. I hear a noise in the sky, and it's coming down. And what is it? And it turns out it's the Khaleesi on her dragon from Game of Thrones. And she's the one who picked me up and brought me. Now, so the point is that what provokes our interest is the moment of breach, isn't it? I mean, if you think about, and then the question is, because there's the predictable, the expected, but then that's boring. Okay, this disruption happens, then we pay attention. And so then the question to ask ourselves is, why is that? What's at stake for us? Why do we care? Well, people will say, well, I'm curious. Yeah, but really think about that. I mean, movies, plays, novels, they're all structured in the same way. I mean, they have different content, but the basic structure, the plot structure is what drives them. So why is that so interesting to human beings? Any thoughts? Why? Nobody knows, but we spend all this money on it. Why? Come on, somebody must have an idea. Yeah, somebody way in the back.
Well, a story is a sequence of events, and if it's a good one, a sequence of emotions and time.
Yeah,
And this is very much sort of a condensed version of the human experience. We experience the world as a series of things that happen to us.
but why does it take the breach to get our attention? And up to that point, we wouldn't even call it a story. Wouldn't we? We wouldn't, not that interested.
As far as I remember from Aristotle, there's a moment of disturbing the scene.
Yeah.
Something that makes the scene
Yeah,
different. Like there is a being,
yeah,
a being,
yeah,
then something else is happening.
yeah,
It's disturbing the being.
yeah.
It's interesting.
But why is it interesting? Why is it interesting? Yeah, huh?
It's a survival mechanism because we survive by predicting what is happening in the world around us. The moment that something disturbs our prediction, it is perceived as a threat, and so we have to understand why
Yeah.
those do.
Yeah, I think this is at the heart of the matter. It's like, people say, well, I'm curious. I want to know what happened. Well, why do you want to know? Well, how many times do unexpected events happen to you every day in small ways? I mean, there's no parking space or whatever. And then, the big things, marriages break up, people lose jobs, people get thrown out of school, we lose loved ones for whom we care, about which we almost by definition cannot be prepared. Isn't it the case that a fundamental dimension of the human experience is to have to cope with that for which we are not prepared? And we seem infinitely curious to figure out how. Not so much the tactics, but how to figure out the conditions under which we can figure out the tactics or whatever else is needed to do that. And so we understand now that we identify with a protagonist in a narrative. And we understand this works through mirror neurons. Now, we understand that we can experience the action of another as if it were our action to some degree. And so the experience we get from the narrative is not, or from the moment, or the protagonist, it's not just like, I just learned that haste makes waste. We're actually experience haste making waste. We experience some of the fear, we experience some of the hope, and what we take away from that then is a moral, but it's a moral much more to the heart than to the head, because it's experiential and it's emotional in content. And so, and the critical value of learning this is that it can enable us, or the resource of narrative can enable us to turn threats from which we flee, right? The old fight, flight, freeze reaction, that which is we're unprepared for, it's a threat, into challenges that we can embrace, that we can go to. It's the difference of replacing fear with hope, isolation with love, self-doubt with a sense of self-worth. And so the work of narrative, that's the work that narrative can do. And so, does this make sense? So, and when you think about it this way, of instruction to the heart, I mean, who were your first storytellers? Where'd you hear your first stories? From the United Guild of Storytellers? Where'd you hear the first stories?
Parents.
Yeah. And so why were they telling you all those stories? I mean, keep you busy, but why else? Why else? You have your own children. Why all that storytelling?
To prepare you for the world.
But to prepare you how?
They want you to know who you are.
Huh?
They want you to know who you are.
Yeah, but yeah, that's true. Well, look, why don't they just say, you are this, this, this? Sometimes people say it's to instruct, we want to instruct our kids, right? Okay, well, just give them a list of rules, do this, don't do that. What's wrong with that? What's missing from it? Yeah, there's no emotional content. But so most families have stories kind of like, let me tell you about Uncle Charlie. Uncle Charlie started out right. He had everything going for him. Then he took a wrong turn. And from there it was down. You don't want to be like Uncle Charlie. Let me tell you about Aunt Harriet. Now, Aunt Harriet got it. You know what I'm talking about? And so it is that capacity to identify with the protagonist. Jerome Bruner called it training and agency. How to become choiceful human beings. How to access the emotional resources, and that goes back to values that are embedded in our values, for the capacity to find hope over fear, empathy over alienation, self-worth over self-doubt. And that's what stories teach, and that's why our faith traditions teach through stories. It's why cultures teach through stories. So what we've been working at is how to harness the power of story, of narrative, to the work of leadership. And so the way we've approached that is inspired by the questions of Rabbi Hillel, who, when asked, what do I do with my life, responded with 3 questions to ask yourself, which was, ask yourself, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? Not a selfish question, but a self-regarding question. You presume to lead, you better be clear about what you expect, what you bring to it, and your own awareness of self. But the second question is, if I am for myself alone, what am I? Because to be a who and not a what is to recognize we exist in relationship with others in the world. We are relational creatures. And thirdly, he says, ask yourself, if not now, when? Not advice to jump into moving traffic, but a caution against what Jane Addams called the snare of preparation. Just another year of strategic planning, we'll have the perfect plan, then we'll go out and implement it, and the world will totally conform to our expectations. Or, oh, I'm getting the stop sign. Okay. Yeah. Got a couple more minutes here. Wait, I just lost.
Sorry.
No, I just lost the thread. I got time. The snare of preparation. Yeah, or in graduate schools, people think, oh, we're going to get a graduate degree, then we're going to be ready to go out and give the world all its answers. Well, that doesn't work either. The point is that rarely can we learn to do well what we want to do until we actually begin to do it. That understanding flows from action, does not precede it, and therefore action requires courage, because it requires a leap into the unknown. It requires a leap into the unpredicted. And to the extent that we fear failure, for example, we don't act. And so those 3 elements together formed a framework that we've used to teach narrative in leadership, which we call How to Tell a Story of Self. Because we each have rich narrative repertoires within us. We all have those narrative moments in which we learned what we care for, often hurtful moments, but also moments in which we learned hope, where we got our hope. And so we have those narrative resources within that we often forget about, or they're powerful influences on us, but because we haven't articulated them, they are not resources for us. This is Charles Taylor's whole point, I think, about articulation of moral sources, is putting it into words that we can speak and communicate, because then we have a deeper understanding of the sources of our own values, both that's which we care and where we get our hope. A story of us is how to use narrative to create a sense of shared value within a community. Story of self may be how you get me. A story of us is how we get each other. And then a story of now is turning the present moment into a narrative moment, a moment in which we confront an urgent, perhaps threat that we try to turn into a challenge, in which we have to choose how to respond, which is at the heart of agency, and a source of hope on the basis of which we can make those choices. And so that framework of Self-Us Now is sort of the fundamental framework. We've taken it a bit farther, and I'll stop in just a couple minutes. We've taken it a bit farther, and I have students here who are in our public narrative course to look specifically about how we can use narrative to bridge from a self to an us, in other words, as a leadership practice, with respect to 4 challenges. The challenge of loss. How can we use narrative to understand loss to avoid understanding loss as contaminative, but can understand it as redemptive? Not taking the pain out of it, but going one way or the other with it, the difference between victim and survivor. That's a very important and way you can use narrative. A second one is boundedness. Is it always great to have an inclusive narrative? Maybe that defeats any capacity for agency. Maybe what's needed is an exclusive narrative to build enough agency to be able to generate power to shift. third one, what about change? You know, we have these old stories that we live in, right? And, you know, change comes, we want to reject it. Or do we just accept enough of the change to keep the old story? We call that accommodation. Or do we see the change as an opportunity to begin a new story, bridging from the old to the new? Or do we see the change as a call to obliterate the past and start entirely new? And finally, power. And that's the one I wanted to end with, because we build on the work of James Scott here, who's a political scientist, anthropologist at Yale, who identifies that when there's power inequality, there's always at least 4 narratives in play. Of the subordinate side, there is a public narrative. Often it's very deferential and compliant. But then there is a hidden narrative where people are struggling to retain agency in some way, despite the fact that the public narrative may be one of compliance. Cultural activities are critically important. Faith communities, you think of the role of the black church during slavery. This is a place where people were cultivating their agency. Now, on the dominant side, there's also the public narrative and the private one. And the public one, as George Orwell wrote a great essay about shooting the elephant, talks about how a person holding power can be constrained in the use of it because they have to uphold the authority that they're stuck with. But there may also be an off-the-stage narrative. And so it's trying to understand the complexity of these moments. A person may be a subordinate and a dominant at the same time. It's not unusual around this university where people who are quite on dominant, but they may also be subordinate. And how to bring that sophistication of understanding. Because when the hidden narrative goes public of the subordinate, there's almost always an emotional explosion. Because all this has been bent up all these years. And on the other side, they've been telling themselves, our people are happy. Otherwise, we'd know it. It must be some outside agitator here who's stirring up our people. In other words, there is a profound moment of truth when that happens. And the question that we look at is, at what point does compliance preserve agency, and at what point does resistance preserve agency? Because you can resist at a moment in which the result is you get killed, and that's the end of it. So it helps distinguish between agency and power. And this distinction, I think, is critically important, because cultivating agency, the capacity to understand our circumstances, make choices about it, narrative can make a powerful contribution to that. Power is about how to shift the terms of dependency. It's about how to use interdependency to shift the economic, the political, and the cultural power to alter the structural circumstances within which those narratives are embedded. And so there's a big question is, at what point is compliance the best exercise of agency? No, we don't have enough power yet. If we break through before we got enough power, we may have a problem. So there's a tension there that I think is very helpful to look at, because just changing the story does not by itself change the power. And I think there's a lot of confusion about that. It creates the potential to change the power. But engaging in political and economic power struggles is fundamental to change the power. So there's an interdependence and a relationship, and I think it's worth thinking about how that works, how it plays out, and what the role of narrative is with respect to all of this. And I just I'll conclude by saying that there are options. You can mobilize out of fear, in which case the story is, yes, I can. Turn over your agency to me. I'll do it for you. That sound familiar with anybody in public life these days? Or you can mobilize around hope, which is, yes, we can, because together we can build the power that we need to change. Does that recall anyone either? So nothing's a given, but this is a place where the role of agency is fundamentally critical, and the emotional conditions for the exercise of agency, which are often ignored, absolutely basic, and that's the work of story.
Well, thank you all. And again, what we've done through this project is really bring people together from a variety of perspectives, strengths, disciplines, experiences, to help us think, not to give answers, but to think in new ways about a process and a set of questions and a journey together that can yield some very different kinds of results than reproducing the same old structures that we are all confronting. So I just want to say thanks again to my wonderful colleagues
Thank
for your. And as I predicted, we have set up Noam so well. You are all fired up now for a comedy routine. But Noam, how do you want us to do this? To take a stretch break? Would that be good, or do you want to move right in?
No, move right in.
Move right, okay, yeah, because all right, stretching is not good. So, Rami, I think you're gonna, okay, all right, here we go. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, everyone, thank you for coming. My name is Rami, I'm a fellow here with the program, and I was asked to introduce one of my best friends, Noam Schuster. So how do you introduce someone who's that close to you? You go personal. I've known Noam ever since she was 15. Back in 2002, I was 17 years old, and it was the first time ever that both of us came to the States. We didn't know each other before. We were part of this a coexistence organization, what Hilary calls a kumbaya organization. And yeah, we were kids back then, and it was in the middle of the second intifada, the Palestinian uprising, and we just wanted a free trip to the States. So we did all these activities, talked in front of people, did some fundraising, and we visited the East Coast, and when we visited the East Coast, we came to Boston. So obviously, when you come to Boston, you have to visit Harvard. And I remember back in 2002, 17 years ago, Noam and I were sitting in Harvard Square, and I told her, and you told me, you agreed with me, we said that we will be back here at some point. 17 years after.
I'm still taller than you.
You're still taller than me. But you've been doing a lot for the past 17 years. We're not talking about coexistence and peace anymore. We're talking about just peace. Your activities in the past 17 years, how you became accepted in Palestinian circles with Palestinian intellectuals and Palestinian artists, I think that alone speaks for itself. Imagine, think of the comedians, you know. How many of them succumb to the cheap, to the pleasing, you know, just to be out there, just to become successful. Noam is not like that. I'm happy that you're not like that. I'm proud of you for being the way you are. And this is one of the reasons why you're that accepted within Palestinian circles. I forgot what I was going to say. I actually had a joke. Oh, yeah. So here I am introducing you 17 years after. I know what you guys are thinking. It must be fate, right? She could be a Mossad agent following us. I don't know. I'm still on the fence on that one. So, Noam Habibti, I love you. And this means a lot. And here we are together at Harvard. Here I am introducing you at a conference. So everyone, please welcome Noam Schuster!
I think, yeah, let's go. It's okay. I'll prove myself without the music. Yeah, clap, get up. Let's stand up for a second. Everyone stand up and shake a little bit. Woohoo! It's hot in here. We need to breathe. Can you hear me? Is it on? This is on now? Okay, yeah. So shake your hands a little bit. Woo! Shake all the Israel and Palestine out of your systems. Okay, cool. Sit down. Wow. I don't know if this is on, but you can hear me very well. Yeah, and first of all, I just want to acknowledge how I'm personally not surprised that this amazing initiative is being led by phenomenal women. Women! This is what happens when we actually lead stuff. We think outside of the box. Rami intentionally didn't tell you what the name of the show, that I'm working on at Harvard. But when I received an email from this wonderful initiative, it was, hi Noam. It was like, like a Harvard email pops in your inbox, right? After you've ignored like 700 emails, that one you open up no matter where you are. And you're like, hey Noam, we heard about your work and we would like you to propose a project to come work on at Harvard. And I was like, is this a joke? At Harvard, they must Google me. They know I'm a comedian. So I was like, okay. This must be something special, something interesting. I'm going to propose something to them to see if they're really willing, to go the next step with me. So I wrote this like nice proposal, how I want to develop a one-woman act, challenging all the narratives and conceptions and politics of identity. And the show will be called Coexistence My Ass. Yeah, right? What I didn't expect 10 days later is to get a reply like, hey Noam, Coexistence My Ass is approved by Harvard. So first of all, I want to start with like the serious things, just to acknowledge who is with me tonight. Did I match with anyone on dating apps? Here, raise your hand, don't be shy. He's like, no. He's like, I'm married. Anyone? No? Okay, cool, because just to set the ground. And Palestinians in the audience, Rami, I know you're a Palestinian. Palestinians in the audience, raise your hands. Okay. So don't worry, I'm here for like 17 minutes, not 72 years, and I'll be gone. So Jews. Okay. Well, we are at Harvard, so yeah. But from those who raised your hands, any non-Ashkenazi, non-European Jews? Okay. See some Iraqi, some... Okay, great. Chaziza, yes. Perfect. We're going to be talking about all of that. So, hi. This is not, an easy time to do comedy with everything that's happening at home. And I am going to address that because what I would like to talk to you about, except from what I'm actually developing, is also how do you deal with the things that I'm trying to deal with in my comedy and my writing. So maybe I should acknowledge this in the beginning, despite of what's happening at home, I am here. And I think all the fellows together in this initiative, we are trying to, I think, maybe break through some small cracks of light and alternatives that could make people think and rethink and reimagine our own stories and our own possibilities at home, because truly, as we're speaking right now, kids in Gaza are being bombed without any shelters, and I am standing here and speaking in front of you, knowing for sure that there will never, ever, ever be any good future for me or any Jews and Israelis without the full security and freedom of those children in Gaza. So it's important for me, to say that, and for us to acknowledge this here, and not to talk just in, give ourselves some discounts. So this is why I am here. Whew! Okay, so my name is, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Noam Schuster. Yes, I have a name of an MIT professor. A lot of times when I say Noam, so people are like, is it Norm? Is it Noam? So I'm just like, you can just call me Chomsky. Get it over with, it's fine. But it's funny, it's really, really nice to have a name of, like an Ashkenazi professor on my CV, because I never look for a job. The job is looking for me, right? So when I have a bad day, for example, I just take out my CV and I send it to NASA. And within 7 minutes, They call me back and they're like, Mr. Schuster, we'd love to have you for an interview. And then I walk in the door and they're like, is this the girl from the tanning salon? Where is Mr. Schuster? Where is Mr. Schuster? So I am mixed. So the Schuster side of the family, my dad is a Romanian Jew. There's never any excitement when I say that. People are like, okay, so what? My dad is so cute. He doesn't look anything like me. He looks like a Swedish sperm donor next to me. He looks like that guy that adopted the brown girl, like trying to, you know. But my mom, so I turned out to look, shalom, aha. Important, thank God you're not here for my introduction. Hi, people from, we'll get to you, we'll get to her. My mom, and my mom is an Iranian Jew. See, that's interesting, you know, it's interesting. So because I can't go to Iran, I mean, for now I can't go to Iran. I have an Israeli passport, right? But I have a feeling like someone in the Iranian government is like following me on Instagram. And they're like, this Iranian Jew, she's so smart. Maybe we let her into Iran. Maybe we'll let her in. But then the problem is that I can't be on stage and do comedy in front of men. So that will be a... But imagine if like I go into Iran just because I'm so funny. That it's reimagining the Middle East. So my mom is an Iranian Jew. She's the best mom in the world. She's an amazing feminist. I was raised by these like Persian women feminists. Most of the time they're feminists, except when they think about my uterus. But my mom has eight brothers and sisters. Big Persian family. I have a very racist aunt. She calls them the Muslim Brotherhood. It's a true story. And I had to come all the way to Harvard to learn my mother tongue. Yeah, I'm taking Farsi classes now. All the Iran, where are my Iranian friends in the back? They're like, Persian, good, yes, good. And the Farsi teacher, actually Professor Mitra Shavarini, she was my Brandeis professor. I was an undergrad at Brandeis. And Iranians are like following me everywhere, and I'm so happy for that. Thank you for coming. So in the Farsi language class, the teacher, you know, in the first, you know, it's the first time that he meets an Israeli, and he's like, you're Persian, but you're Israeli, you're Jewish. And then there's a Lebanese guy in the class who is like, you sit together, your country is not talking, you talk now in class. And then I was really eager in the first days of classes. I wanted to tell him that I want to find out from him all of these words that I don't know from my family. My family, I really don't know how to say like fun and like positive things. And so I told him, Professor, how do I say fun? So he looks at me, he's like, I don't know. And I'm like, what do you mean, you're a language teacher? He's like, Noam, fun is not central to our experience. Right. But my parents are really cute. They are what some Israelis call them traitors. Sweet, cute leftists, liberals. They raised me with Palestinians, so I grew up in the only community in Israel where Palestinians and Jews live together by choice. Some people say that it's the only community where Ashkenazi Jews and Ashkenazi Arabs live together by choice. I don't know. But for most certainly, because the peace camp in Israel is so white, I'm the only one in this village who looks Middle Eastern. And that created a lot of frustrations and confusions in my childhood, okay? Now, my parents, they're cute. I love them. I've been going with them to demonstrations since the age of 7. Now I'm 32. So when I go with them to demonstrations, it's because I'm single, okay? And you too, organizers and leftists, and I know all of you activists. You also, Rosa, you're laughing. You all go to all these organizations to meet people. Yeah, I know. But what's the problem with left-wing demonstrations? What's the problem in left-wing demonstrations? No men? Oh, no, there is men. The only good-looking men are the police officers. So I have ideological problems. But we moved to this village when I was 7 years old. It was the heat of the Oslo agreements. Everyone were excited about something today. I don't know what the hell they were excited about, but there was an excitement, right? And I got to this village. I was already this tall at the second grade. I learned Arabic so quickly. We learned together in that school. It's a bilingual, binational, bicultural school. So I learned with my Palestinian classmates. I learned Arabic with them. And up until today, they think I'm recording them for the Mossad. I learned it to communicate with you. 32 years later. They're still, but are you recording me? And so after second grade, I learned Arabic so quickly. The principal of school came to my father. He's like, Yechezkel, we're skipping your daughter immediately to 4th grade. My father was like, I knew my daughter, she's smart, she's so intelligent. I knew she's going to skip a grade. And the principal was like, smart, intelligent, she's too tall, she steps on the kids, we have to. When I performed this for the first time in front of my teachers like a year ago, I came to them and told them, oh, isn't that so cute that I turned this story like as if you skipped me a grade because I was too tall? They looked at me, it's like, yeah, but that's really why. It's like. So, and then the Oslo agreements failed, right? Rabin was assassinated exactly 24 years ago, as soon as we got to the village. And then everything kind of shifted. And I was always the kind of like charismatic, generic brown girl in the class. And Bibi was elected, and at the time, Hilary Clinton was the first lady of the United States. And she came with Sarah Netanyahu, who was then, for the first time, the wife of the prime minister. And 24 years later, she is still drinking champagne somewhere with the same title. They came to the school. They came to the school to see Jews and Arabs, kids studying together. And I was the dominant, charismatic in the front row. They let me sing a song in Hebrew. Maybe some of you know it. Marshall, maybe you know it? Shiru shir la shalom. No? No. Al tilcha shutfi l'harami. Coexistence, my ass.
I'm not gonna.
That's it. And then I finished the song for peace in Hebrew. I finished the song, and Sarah Netanyahu and Hillary Clinton, they come to the front row and they look at me. They're like, it is so moving, your Hebrew is so articulate. My best friends in this community, my best friends in this village who are Palestinian, Ranin, my best friend, she's a Christian Palestinian. She looks like Gigi Hadid. Straight out of like modeling journals in Europe. When we cross through checkpoints, soldiers stop us, they hit on her, they ask for her number, they look at me like, excuse me, give me your ID. I look like Khomeini next to her. But really the childhood in such a place was amazing. Obviously gave me a lot of materials for comedy. But also every single kind of experience that I had in this community growing up was always mixed with the traumas of the Jews and the Palestinians, right? Because we grew up on both narratives. And 2 years ago, we had a fire. A fire broke in the forest, which is located right next to the village. And firefighters and police and a lot of security forces started coming to the village. And you know, we the Jews, we knew like everyone has to be evacuated from the homes because it was real danger. Now we Jews were used to fires, you know, we're used to kind of these kind of atrocities. We take the passport, we put it in the pocket, we take the gold from the henna, from the safe we swallow, and we were running towards a safe zone designated for us. But my Palestinian neighbors, no one moved from their homes. They didn't move. And all the Jews, we were in this safe designated area. And I'm like, where are my Palestinian neighbors? No one is here. And so we sent all the security people to call Palestinians to leave their homes. And one of the security guards take the, hello, how are you? takes the megaphone and goes to my neighbor Yusuf. He's like, Yusuf, Ahmad, you have to evacuate your homes immediately. And Yusuf takes out his face out of the window. He's like, I already heard that in 48. And then the security guard is like, no, Yusuf, you will be able to come back. He's like, I already heard that too. After 1 hour that we're together, finally I see Yusuf, you know, with his, sorry, but no stereotypes, but with his wife beater shirt and his like, you know, phones and everything. And he's like running to the safe zone. And he's almost wearing nothing. And, you know, we have some stuff that we brought from home. So I'm like, Yusuf, did you bring anything from home? He's like, I brought my charger. You didn't learn anything from 48. No, but I mean, I'm here in front of you, and you've been hearing, I mean, I don't have a lot of time, but I do, it is very, very important for me to say that a little bit about the journey and the stuff that I'm working on. Up until 2.5 years ago, I was working for the UN. I did a great job, if you heard the news. I did so well. I was traveling everywhere. I was going to all these conferences. You know, to some extent, all of us we benefit from the conflict, right? We get scholarships. I'm here at Harvard. Rami? I mean, I've been traveling the world, doing conferences, getting scholarships. We all, to some extent, I don't know who I will be without this conflict. I'm being honest with you. I don't know who I will be without this. And I think a lot about what happens, you know, if tomorrow, for example, Israel like removes the wall, you know? The occupation slowly starts ending, the walls between us, the separation between us, you know, and all of those people who benefit, like Banksy. What will Banksy do? If there is no wall, for example, Banksy will be like, can you leave me just a little part of the wall so I can do some graffiti? And when we get rid of the wall, right? A Palestinian family will wake up in the middle of the night, and the kid is used to Israeli army raiding the house. He'll wake up and say, Mama, Mama, the army is raiding our house again. And the mom will say, no, Habibi, no, Ibni, no, my son. It's Banksy. He's still here doing some graffiti. Banksy, go home. Why don't you go get a real job and leave us alone? So what happens? What happens, you know, when there is no conflict? By the way, this joke, brilliantly, and I'm sharing the process with you, okay? Sarah, please stand up. Sarah, stand up. I'm working with two amazing students. Sarah, by the way, is a Tibetan American amazing writer and student who is working here and working with me, right? Am I correct? Right? Hi, say hi. And for some miraculous reason, I am going to be meeting the Dalai Lama next month. So we're going to be working on some materials to add to the show as well. So it's all very, very exciting. It's like I'm trying to run away from stuff, and stuff. You know, it's like stuff keep coming back at me, and a lot of materials to handle. So I was at the UN, and I know we're tired, and I promise it's not going to be very, very long. But 2.5 years ago, I started feeling a serious, like, heavy weight in my throat. I started feeling like I'm not influencing, like I'm not doing enough, like I'm not able to influence, you know, not even my own experience with Palestinians, but influencing my own society, right? The responsibility I have towards extremism in Israeli society, or to my own society. Basically, I was fired from my job. And in one of the conferences where I was supposed to talk, you know, analytically and in a serious way about my work, I was left with a mic, basically, and I just started telling jokes. And I didn't know where this process is going, and I had no idea, you know, where it will lead, but the type of responses and reactions that I started getting were just something that I did not expect at all. You know, I guess there was a demand for an Iranian, Jewish, Arabic-speaking tall, dominant woman to tell jokes about the conflict. I don't know, I filled like a spot, you know, I don't know, you never know. And after a few months of doing comedy, I was invited to a Palestinian comedy festival. And actually this summer, a brilliant female Palestinian comedian who's here with us tonight, Dalia, who also performed this summer at the Palestinian Comedy Festival. The first time I performed there, it was very, very tense, but I was able to go on stage. And it was very, very tense. And I got up, and I was like, I did the same joke like I did with you guys. It was like, I'm only here for 7 minutes, not 70 years. And it broke the ice. And in 9 minutes, in front of 300 people in East Jerusalem, I felt like I was able to reimagine something that was much, much more constructive and exciting than many, many, many years of activism that kept going backwards and backwards. This year, and I'm sharing this with you so that you understand a little bit of the context that I'm dealing with by putting myself in this space. This year, the comedians, I was part of the lineup. It was a beautiful lineup of brilliant comedians from all over, and I was there with them. And I was planning to go on stage, and at the last minute, I was not able to go up and perform, due to many reasons. There was a comedian from Gaza who last minute his permit was taken away, and he was not able to come and perform. The congresswomen Ilhan and Rashida were not, at the same time, were not being allowed to come on their delegation. A bunch of reasons where it didn't make sense that I will go up, and I'm sharing this with you because, you know, I stayed there and I knew the reasons why I can't go up, and I knew that now it's not the time. And we live in a time also where comedy is, and I think not just comedy, but a lot of other creative tools were able to reach the kind of audiences and be in very complex political spaces that otherwise we would not be able to. And I'll give you an example, because I got into a lot of trouble for doing comedy in Arabic. Because a Jewish woman doing comedy in Arabic in the Middle East is not something common, okay? So you know that we had 2 rounds of elections in Israel, right? Yeah. So the previous round of elections, I got an Arabic comedy spot on TV in Israel. And it was elections, and I had a lot of ideas for jokes, so I made up that I'm starting a party, a political party called Naameh, which is my name in Arabic. And this party is going to work. Some of you are nodding because you know that I got into a lot of trouble for making up this party. But I got into trouble with the Saudi Crown Prince, Mr. MBS Mohammed bin Salman. Now, sir, if you're ever in a Turkish consulate, don't mess with this guy. We don't want to mess. He's the bad boy of the Middle East, and don't tell jokes about him also. So I made up that I'm starting a party, and I told a bunch of actually not very well-written jokes. I said how it's hard to be a woman in politics, and I'm tall, and I'm single, and it's hard to get dates, and it's hard to get mandates when you start a party. And I said that my party is going to work on collaboration and cooperation in the Middle East. Everything is in Arabic. And then I said that I'm looking for a powerful leader to help me promote my party. And then I looked straight at the camera and I said, I heard that Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria, is very tall, but I don't want him. So I looked straight at the camera and I'm like, MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, hi, marhaba. My name is Noam. I started this party called Naameh. I want to work on cooperation in the Middle East. I heard that you're talking to Israelis. There are rumors that you're speaking to Bibi, warming up ties with Israel. So why don't you come and promote my party and promote me? Wink. Bad joke, honestly. Very bad joke. I didn't even perform it very well in front of the camera. It wasn't written well. I was just trying to get it over with. You know, I didn't even care. I woke up the next day. The entire Arabic-speaking media, the whole Middle East, had the next viral items. Zionist party leader proposes marriage to Mohammed bin Salman. Now, you guys at Harvard, you Googled me to see that I'm a comedian. Like, journalists, Google, like, so that was fine, you know. I was like, okay, we'll wait for the storm to pass. This is obviously, you know, they're using this kind of Israeli flirtatious moment to get at him, that he's normalizing ties, you know, with Israel. But then the Persian-speaking media, the Iranians the next day followed up with the next title, Iranian Jew comedian made a joke, Arabs didn't get it. So I was like, which conflict am I on now between Iranians and Arabs or Jews and Arabs? I don't know. I have no idea. And, you know, in those moments, it was really, really, truly, truly incredible to receive messages, really millions. And like Rami was, you know, with me at the time, going through all these weeks and weeks of, you know, storm of, first of all, presenting something new, right? Where like I have this power that was given to me because of the way I grew up, that I can communicate directly in the Middle East, not as a military person, but as someone who's like now able to communicate and, you know, do things. And also the kind of, you know, not even realizing like the, you know, the numbers that you can get and the kind of, I mean, attention, yeah, there is something very scary about this kind of attention, but when you get this attention, what do you do with it? I was trying to say something that speaks to the, you know, narrow-minded leaders in the Middle East. Like, the only friends that Bibi can make in the Middle East are the Saudis, where we obviously have much more, you know, pressing issues and bridges to build in the Middle East. So that was, you know, kind of my way of trying to get at it. I mean, this is very moving and this is very exciting, and I am very, very happy that I'm kind of starting this conference on a, you know, maybe a lighter note, because my colleagues and the fellows tomorrow are going to be presenting their projects, and they're doing exciting things that I am, you know, I'm so proud that I'm part of this, because things are shifting, and the fact that, you know, comedy is allowed in this space, cultural activism is in this space, filmmaking, music, activism that is not within a realm. You know, I tell people that I'm a comedian at Harvard, they're like, oh, you're writing a PhD about how humor affects politics, great. Like, no, I'm writing comedy. Oh, so your research is about how comedy is, you know, getting out of what we know in order to introduce, you know, get attention to other things. So I thank you very, very much. I usually don't ever leave an audience without telling them a little bit about my Persian grandma. So I'm just doing a check. Are you guys okay? Yeah, you're okay? Yeah. You should hear about my, I have the most amazing Persian. I'm here because of her, seriously. She's everything to me. You know, a lot of conservatives, when they hear my story and they hear about the fact that my parents raised me with Palestinians, you know, they tell my parents, what did you do to your kids? They lost their identity. Their identity is so like mixed, and they probably don't know who they are. And I tell these people, what's the big deal? My brother converted to Islam and I only date Arabs. What's the big deal? You know? So I'm not gonna lie to you, you know, Iranians, Persians, whether, you know, like my family, they're traditional, you know, they lived next to Muslims and other cultures in Iran without the intention to mix, okay? So it took my Persian family a long time to understand why my mother, after we left Iran, intentionally moves to live with Arabs to make peace together. So the first Shabbat that we had in the mixed village after my parents moved there, I remember my Persian grandma walking into our house very, very slowly, very, very quietly, of course with a pot of rice, because Persians were born into a pot of rice, with a hair laser treatment, how do you say? Yeah, laser treatment. Hair removal, we're hairy, okay. I need to explain to you everything. So my grandma walks into the house very, very slowly, not making any noise. And I'm like, Grandma, what's wrong? She's like, shh, close the door. There is Arabs outside. And Grandma, they're Ashkenazi Arabs. They won't do anything to you. And then, you know, I mean, it's 32. I'm 32 years old. And every Persian grandma has this conversation, much before 32, but never mind, it's for the bit. She's like, Noam, now you are 32 years old. It's okay, you can marry a non-Jew. Now, how do you say non-Jew in Hebrew? Goy, right? And Dalia is like, Goy. And what's the feminine version of Goy? Goya. No, Goya. No, don't go there, okay? Goya. So my grandma, because her Hebrew is not so good, so she mixes between feminine and masculine. So she's like, you can marry a Goya. Like, ooh, grandma! You're a radical feminist now. What's happening? I cannot marry a Goy. I can also marry a Goya. Okay, let me change my Tinder references. So she looks at me and she says, yeah, look what happened. So what? Your mother married a Goya. Everything is okay. I was like, Grandma, Daddy is not a Goya. Daddy is just Ashkenazi. She's like, your father looks like Jesus. I'm like, Grandma, Jesus was a Jew. She's like, ah! No, but you know, actually, I missed this part because I wanted to tell you that I actually, because I can't go to Iran, I actually went to Romania for like roots searching, you know. And oh my God, people are just racist everywhere. Every store that I went into, there was a security guard behind me thinking I was a well-dressed Roma, came to steal. So I told him, excuse me, I'm a well-dressed Jew who came to steal. Tsering wrote this joke, clap, clap. Yes. I love it. Comedy is the best thing in the world. They laughed from your joke. Amazing. Where were we now? Oh, my grandma. My grandma. So my grandma doesn't, whenever we talk about not the fact that I'm not married and I'm still single and I'm 32, so she's like, go to student club, meet someone, student. I'm like, Grandma, there's no student club. Now we have Tinder. Do we know what Tinder is? Over there, the young section? Yeah, we know what Tinder is. Do you want to tell us how you know what Tinder is? Pretty simple app. You see someone, you like them, you swipe right. Rami is like, you swipe right, you don't like them, you swipe left. If two people swiped right on each other, they match on the app. She's like, yes, I know. And then we can start chatting with each other. Now, Israel is a very small place, and I have big family with a lot of Persian cousins. So when I took out my phone to show my grandma my Tinder, 2 cousins in a row on my screen. Now, I always have to, when I say in Hebrew cousins, bnei dodim, it's like they say that Jews and Arabs are bnei dodim, Jews and Arabs are cousins. So I have to say, not we cousins, my real cousins. 2 cousins. Now, the first cousin, I swiped him left. I was like, ah, left. But the second cousin, Jonathan. Jonathan has such nice pictures on Tinder. He studies architecture in Berlin. He's genuinely, don't worry guys, I didn't have sex with Jonathan or anything. You're all like, no, where is she going with this joke? But I'm a woman of integrity, okay? I swiped my cousin right just to make a point for myself, but he swiped me right also, so I matched with my cousin. So we start chatting on the app. And I'm like, Jonathan, this is disgusting. And he's like, what disgusting? We're here because you like me too, you dumbass. And then he goes, you want to take this conversation to WhatsApp? You guys use WhatsApp? Okay, I love you for that. Wow, it always works only like, you know, in front of, because Middle Easterners, we love WhatsApp, and now it works here. Great, perfect. So my grandma looks at this whole thing and she's like, if we were in Iran, you would have married your cousin a long time ago. Okay, I think I'm gonna let you go, but I think you got the point of what I'm doing here. And I just want to say that it's all work in progress, still collecting a lot of materials. Coexistence, my ass is going to have two versions. One is simple, like this, a mic, and the other one is a more like solo theatrical piece with visuals also that are going to go into a theater. And we have a lot of work, and in April and May there is going to be a tour here, hopefully New York, LA, still other places. Yeah, I'm Maz Joubrani, who is a brilliant Iranian-American comedian. Yeah, he's the executive producer of this show, and I'm flying tomorrow night after our conference to perform with him. So it's truly, truly amazing to be able to be here and make these connections with comedians who understand, you know, because sometimes when we talk about identity, when we talk about politics, when we try to do something extra with our comedy, we receive a lot of like, you know, what are you doing? We're here to make people laugh and go home and that's it. No, I really, really, really think that if the Ukrainian president, I wanted to take my political career a step up, so I started telling jokes. And if the Ukrainian president did it, I'm gonna do it also, okay? Just with less phone calls from Trump, hopefully. So thank you very much. Thank you. And enjoy the rest of your conference. And I want to say already thank you to everyone for your support. Diane, Atalia, Reem, Hilary, my co-fellows. Really, it's truly, truly, truly an amazing experience. And I really, really hope that we will all continue to challenge narratives and realities at home and free Israelis and Palestinians from evil and occupation and create equality and future together. Thank you.